They laughed when he called me unemployed at the dinner table. They toasted his millions while he mocked my silence, looking at him like a god and me like a failure. But they didn't know that while they were planning a wedding, I was planning a forensic investigation. I wasn't the black sheep. I was the wolf waiting in the shadows. And when I finally stood up at that vineyard, I didn't bring a gift. I brought the evidence that would burn his entire empire to the ground. Before we dive in, drop a comment with your city or the current time. I love seeing where you're watching from. And if you believe the truth is worth fighting for, even when you stand alone, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's go. There are certain silences in the South that are heavier than any scream. They hang in the humid air like a storm front that refuses to break, filling the spaces between polite smiles and sweetened iced tea. I know that silence better than I know the back of my own hand. It is the specific frequency of the Carter household, a vibration that says everything is perfect, even when the foundation is cracking. My name is Emily Carter. I am 29 years old, and according to the unspoken but heavily implied consensus of my family, I am a disaster in progress. If you were to look at my resume, the one I haven't updated in 6 months, you would see a different story. You would see a bachelor's in mathematics from UT Austin, followed by a master's in data science. You would see 3 grueling, high-octane years as a senior data analyst for a mid-sized hedge fund in New York City. You would see the timestamps on my emails, usually sent at 2 or 3 in the morning, detailing market variances and risk assessments that moved millions of dollars across the Atlantic before most people had even brewed their morning coffee. In that life, I was competent, I was sharp. I was a machine that turned chaos into logic. But resumes don't list the cost of doing business. They don't list the nights I fell asleep on the subway and woke up at the end of the line in Queens, shivering and disoriented. They don't describe the morning I stared at a spreadsheet of emerging market trends and realized I couldn't read the numbers because my vision was blurring from sheer, unadulterated exhaustion. It wasn't just tiredness. It was a spiritual erosion. I was 28 years old, and I felt hollowed out, a husk of a person running on caffeine and anxiety. So, I did the unthinkable. I stopped running. I walked into my boss's glass-walled office, handed in my resignation, and told him I needed time. Not a week at the Hamptons, not a sick day. I needed a year, a sabbatical, a hard reset to figure out if I actually loved the numbers, or if I just loved the validation they gave me. I packed up my tiny, overpriced apartment in the Lower East Side, put my furniture in storage, and drove my beat-up sedan back down to Austin, Texas. To me, it was a strategic retreat, a necessary pause to recalibrate my life before I turned 30. To my parents, Robert and Susan Carter, it meant exactly one thing: unemployment. They never used that word. Of course. That word was too ugly, too lower class for a family that prided itself on projecting an image of effortless success. In the Carter lexicon, unemployment was something that happened to other people, people who didn't have grit or proper direction. When it happened to their eldest daughter, it wasn't a financial status. It was a character flaw. It was a smudge on the pristine lens through which they viewed the world. I had been back in Austin for 4 months, living in a small, quirky studio apartment downtown, far enough away from their sprawling suburban fortress to breathe, but close enough to feel the gravitational pull of their expectations. I spent my days taking online courses in advanced machine learning and reading books I'd been too busy to touch for years. I was actually happy. Or, at least, I was finding my way back to equilibrium. But every time I drove north to visit them, that equilibrium was shattered. It starts the moment you cross the threshold of their neighborhood. The grass changes first. It becomes greener, denser, cut with a geometric precision that defies nature. The houses are massive limestone and stucco structures, sitting behind circular driveways filled with SUVs that have never seen a speck of mud. It is a world where appearance is the highest form of currency. If you look good, you are good. If your lawn is brown, you are failing. My parents are the masters of this domain. My father, a retired corporate attorney, treats conversation like a deposition. He doesn't ask how you are. He interrogates you for signs of weakness. My mother, a woman who has never let a hair fall out of place since 1985, wields passive aggression like a surgical instrument. She can eviscerate your self-esteem with a compliment about your shoes. It's just brave. Emily, she had said to me a week after I came back, stirring her coffee with a silver spoon that chimed against the porcelain, to just walk away from a career in New York. I suppose not everyone is built for that level of pressure. It's good you know your limits. She made it sound like I had washed out of Navy SEAL training rather than chosen to prioritize my mental health. I wanted to scream. I wanted to pull up my bank statements and show her the savings account that proved I could afford this break. I wanted to explain the concept of burnout, the physiology of stress, and the likelihood of early heart failure among finance professionals. But I didn't, because in this house, explanations sound like excuses. The comparison, naturally, is the other sharp edge of the blade. If I am the cautionary tale, my younger sister, Olivia, is the hero's journey. At 27, Olivia is a marketing manager for a biotech startup in San Diego. She is blonde, bubbly, and fiercely ambitious in a way that photographs well. Her life is a curated feed of sunsets, avocado toast, and hustle culture quotes. To my parents, Olivia is the proof that their parenting worked. She followed the script. She got the job. She got the promotion. She got the sleek apartment with the ocean view. I love my sister. I really do. Growing up, we were allies against the pressure cooker of our parents' expectations. We used to hide in the treehouse in the backyard, eating contraband candy bars and promising each other we'd never turn into them. But somewhere along the way, the dynamic shifted. Olivia started believing the hype. She started needing the applause just as much as they needed to give it. And as I drifted into the messy, complicated gray areas of adulthood, she doubled down on the black and white pursuit of perfection. When she calls me now, her voice has a slight edge of pity. "How's the finding yourself going, she asks. "Have you thought about maybe sending out just a few resumes? Just to keep your hand in the game? I know a guy in San Francisco who's hiring." She means well. They all mean well. That's the insidious part. They love me. But they love a version of me that no longer exists. They love Emily, who gets straight A's. The Emily who climbs the ladder. They don't know what to do with Emily, who stepped off the ladder to look at the view. And tonight, the pressure was going to be dialed up to 11. I was sitting in my car, parked in the driveway of my apartment complex, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. My phone sat on the passenger seat, displaying a text message from my mother. "Dinner at 7:00 sharp. Please wear something nice. Olivia is bringing someone special. Big news." Big news! In our family, that could mean anything from a promotion to a new car. But with Olivia involved, and as someone special in tow, the variables narrowed significantly. I checked my reflection in the rearview mirror. I looked tired, but not the deep, bone-weary tired of New York. I looked like a woman who was figuring things out. I had traded the power suits for a soft linen blouse and jeans. My dark hair was loose, not pulled back in the severe bun I used to wear for board meetings. I looked like myself. But I knew that the moment I walked through their front door, this version of me would be under attack. I would be the problem to be solved. The loose end. The daughter who had so much potential, but lost her way. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of hot asphalt and cedar that makes Austin smell like home. Regardless of how complicated that word is, I turned the key in the ignition. The engine hummed to life, a steady, reliable sound in a world of variables. I wasn't going there to fight. I was too exhausted to fight. I was going there to survive dinner. I told myself it was just a meal, just roast chicken and green beans, and 2 hours of polite conversation. How bad could it be? But as I pulled out onto the highway, merging into the traffic heading north, I felt a knot of dread tighten in my stomach. It was a data point I couldn't ignore. My intuition, honed by years of analyzing patterns and predicting crashes, was flashing a warning light. The sky above Austin was turning a bruised purple as the sun set, casting long shadows across the highway. I drove toward the wealthy suburbs, toward the manicured lawns and the silent judgments, unaware that the big news waiting for me wasn't just going to ruin dinner. It was going to dismantle the entire careful architecture of our lives. I wasn't just driving home. I was driving into a collision. The drive north to my parents' house is less of a commute and more of a procession into a different reality. As I left the erratic, pulse-pounding energy of downtown Austin, the landscape began to smooth out, ironing itself into something palatable and predictable. The erratic food trucks and graffiti-splashed retaining walls gave way to limestone privacy fences and gated communities with names that sounded like British Manors, Stone Creek, Hidden Valley, Royal Oaks. By the time I turned into their subdivision, the transformation was complete. This was the land of the Homeowners Association, a place where grass height is regulated by bylaws and a rogue dandelion is considered a moral failing. The houses here were magnificent, sprawling structures that cost more than most people earn in a lifetime. Yet they suffered from a strange, sterile uniformity. They were all variations on the same theme: Tuscan beige stucco, dark wood accents, and three-car garages that faced the street like fortress gates. It was a neighborhood built on the principle of copy and paste. It was beautiful, undeniably, but it was the kind of beauty that demanded you not touch anything. I slowed my sedan down, conscious of the quiet. There were no kids playing in the streets here, no music drifting from open windows. Just the hum of sprinkler systems and the silent, imposing presence of wealth. My phone buzzed on the console, cutting through the silence. It was my mother. I hit the button on the steering wheel, and her voice filled the car, crisp and slightly breathless, as if she were coordinating a royal visit rather than a Tuesday night dinner. "Emily, are you close? I'm turning onto the street now." "Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Good, good. Listen to me," she said, her tone dropping a decibel, the universal signal for a conspiratorial instruction. "Tonight is delicate. Olivia is bringing him, the man she's been seeing. It's serious, Emily, very serious." "I gathered that," I said. "I'm happy for her." "I know you are," she rushed on. "But please, honey, just for tonight, read the room. Don't bring up the hiatus." I tightened my grip on the wheel. "You mean my life?" "You know what I mean," she snapped, her anxiety flaring. "Don't talk about being burned out. Don't talk about soul-searching. People like him, people who operate at that level, they don't understand that. To them, it just sounds like quitting. Just tell him you're consulting, or considering options. Just keep it professional. Can you do that for your sister?" The request hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. It wasn't just a request to be polite. It was a request to erase myself, to my mother. My reality was an embarrassment that needed to be edited out of the final cut. She didn't want Emily the daughter. She wanted Emily the prop, a successful, stable prop that wouldn't distract from the main attraction. "I won't embarrass you, Mom," I said, the words tasting like ash. "Thank you, just be normal. See you in a minute." The line went dead. I pulled into the circular driveway, parking my 5-year-old sedan next to my father's gleaming black Lexus SUV. My car looked like a dusty intruder, a piece of debris that had washed up on a pristine beach. I turned off the engine and sat there for a moment, listening to the ticking of the cooling metal. Be normal. The command echoed in my head. In this zip code, normal meant a specific trajectory: college, corporate job, marriage, mortgage, country club. Any deviation from that line wasn't just a different choice, it was a malfunction. I looked at the house, the massive double doors, the perfectly trimmed boxwood hedges that looked fake in the twilight. I used to live here. I grew up in that room on the second floor. But sitting there, staring at the warm, golden light spilling from the windows, I felt a profound sense of dislocation. I was about to walk into a place where I was known by everyone, yet understood by no one. I took a breath, grabbed my purse, and stepped out. The air here even smelled different, like freshly laid mulch and expensive exhaust fumes. I walked up the path, the sound of my heels clicking sharply on the stone pavers. I didn't have to knock. The door swung open before I reached it. My mother stood there, a vision in cashmere and pearls, her smile tight and practiced. "You're here," she announced, loud enough for the back of the house to hear, pulling me into a hug that was more about positioning than affection. She smelled of lavender and hairspray. As she squeezed me, she whispered in my ear, "Remember, positive vibes only." She pulled back, scanning me from head to toe. Her eyes lingered for a fraction of a second on my linen blouse, too casual. Her eyes said, but acceptable, before snapping back to my face. "You look rested," she said, the word loaded with that same passive-aggressive weight. Come in, come in. Your father is pouring drinks in the living room." I stepped across the threshold, and the atmosphere hit me instantly. The house was kept at a chilling 68 degrees, a temperature that required long sleeves in the middle of a Texas summer. The lighting was recessed and dim, highlighting the oil paintings of landscapes that no one in the family had ever visited. Everything was beige, cream, or soft gray. It was elegant, spotless, and utterly devoid of life. There wasn't a magazine out of place, not a stray pair of shoes in the hallway. It was a stage set, ready for the actors to take their places. "Robert, Emily is here," my mother called out, guiding me down the hall with a hand firmly on my back. My father emerged from the living room, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He was a tall man who had aged like a statue, stiff, gray, and imposing. He wore a crisp button-down shirt tucked into slacks, his casual wear indistinguishable from his office wear. "Emily," he said, nodding. He didn't hug me. We weren't a hugging family. Really, Mom's performance at the door notwithstanding. He extended a hand, and I shook it. His grip was firm, professional. "Traffic treat you okay?" "It wasn't bad, Dad," I said. "Good, good." He looked past me, checking the driveway through the side lights of the front door. "Olivia and the young man should be here any minute. We want everything ready." "Who is he?" I asked, trying to play the game. Mom made it sound like he's royalty. My father's chest puffed out slightly. "Logan Pierce, real estate, big player in Miami. Olivia says he's managing a portfolio worth over $200 million, a serious man." And he said "serious man" with a reverence he usually reserved for Supreme Court justices or heavy artillery. This was the currency my father understood: net worth, assets under management, title. If Logan Pierce had $200 million under his control, he was already a better son in my father's eyes than I would ever be a daughter. "Sounds impressive," I said, forcing a smile. "It is," my father said, turning back to the living room. "He's flying in just for this. We need to make a good impression. So, let's try to keep the conversation elevated. Okay." There it was again. The warning. "Don't bring your failure into this room." I walked into the living room and sat on the edge of the cream-colored sofa, careful not to disturb the perfectly fluffed pillows. I accepted a glass of iced water, no wine for me. I needed my wits sharp and waited. I looked around the room at the framed photos on the mantelpiece. There was Olivia, receiving her diploma. Beaming. Olivia is winning a debate trophy. Olivia and my parents are on a boat in Tahoe. And tucked in the corner, a smaller photo of me from graduation, smiling politely. I looked at that younger version of myself and felt a wave of sadness. She had no idea that 10 years later, she would be sitting on this couch, terrified to speak her own truth, waiting for a stranger to come in and validate her family's existence. The sound of a heavy car door slamming outside broke the silence. Then another. My mother gasped, smoothing her skirt. "They're here. Robert, put the coaster down. Emily, stand up." I stood up. My heart hammered a slow, heavy rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't just anxious about meeting my sister's boyfriend. I was anxious because I knew that whatever walked through that door was going to be the yardstick I was measured against for the rest of my life. The front door opened, and a burst of laughter floated down the hall. It was Olivia's laugh, bright, high, and slightly too loud. And then, a man's voice, deep and smooth, answered her. I clasped my hands in front of me, a soldier bracing for inspection, and waited for the show to begin. The energy in the room shifted instantly, as if someone had opened a window in a pressurized cabin. Olivia swept into the dining room first, and she looked undeniably radiant. She was wearing a dress that probably cost more than my first car, a sleek, sapphire blue number that caught the light, and her hair was styled in soft, expensive waves. But her eyes were what I noticed. They were wide, darting quickly between our parents and the man behind her, scanning for approval, scanning for the seamless integration of her two worlds. "Mom, Dad, Emily," she announced, stepping aside with a flourish that felt rehearsed. "I'd like you to meet Logan." And there he was. Logan Pierce filled the doorway. He was about 35, tall, with the kind of athletic build that suggests expensive gym memberships rather than manual labor. He wore a charcoal suit that was tailored to within an inch of its life, no bunching at the shoulders, the cuffs hitting exactly at the wrist bone. He was handsome in a way that felt generic but effective: square jaw, tanned skin, and teeth so white they looked like they had been manufactured in a lab. But it was the smile that caught my attention. It didn't reach his eyes. It was a mechanical lifting of the facial muscles, a practiced performance of charm that he could probably hold for hours without cramping. "Mr. and Mrs. Carter," he said, his voice a smooth baritone that seemed to vibrate in the floorboards. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet the people who raised this incredible woman." He stepped forward, bypassing the casual wave and going straight for the power moves. My mother practically levitated. She clasped her hands together, her face glowing with a mixture of relief and adoration. "Oh, Logan, please, call us Susan and Robert. We've heard so much about you. Olivia hasn't stopped talking about Miami." "And I haven't stopped talking about her," Logan replied, winking at Olivia. He turned to my father, extending a hand. My father, the man who had intimidated junior associates and courtroom rivals for 40 years, stood up so fast he almost knocked his chair over. He shook Logan's hand with a vigor that bordered on desperation, his shoulders hunching slightly, a subtle, unconscious posture of submission. It was the body language of a man meeting a superior. "Welcome to our home, Logan," Dad said, his voice booming a little too loudly. "We're delighted to have you. I hear you're doing big things down in Florida." "We try, Robert. We try," Logan said with a humble chuckle that didn't sound humble at all. "The market is aggressive right now, high stakes, but that's where the fun is, isn't it?" Then, his gaze slid to me. For a second, the mask slipped just a fraction. His eyes assessed me, categorized me: the sister, the outlier, the one in the cheap blouse, and dismissed me, all in the span of a heartbeat. Then the smile clicked back into place. "And you must be Emily," he said, offering a hand that felt dry and cool. "The mathematician. Olivia tells me you're taking a little break from the grind." The phrasing was precise, taking a little break. It diminished my entire career into a vacation. "Hi, Logan," I said, shaking his hand briefly. "It's nice to meet you. Please, everyone, sit, sit," my mother urged, ushering us toward the table like a conductor herding an orchestra. "Dinner is ready." As we settled around the long mahogany table, the dynamic was immediately established. Logan was the sun, and my family were the planets orbiting him, desperate for his warmth. I was Pluto cold, distant, and barely acknowledged as part of the system. My mother had pulled out all the stops: the good china, the crystal goblets, the heavy silverware that we only used for Thanksgiving. She served the roast beef with a reverence usually reserved for religious sacraments. So, Logan, my mother started, barely waiting for us to unfold our napkins. Olivia tells us you specialize in luxury residential. Logan took a sip of wine, a vintage Cabernet my father had been saving for 5 years, and nodded appreciatively. That's the core of it, Susan. High-end waterfront properties. But my firm is moving heavily into mixed-use development now. We just closed on a parcel in South Beach. Beautiful spot. We're looking at a gross development value north of 200 million. My father let out a low whistle. 200 million, that's substantial. Logan shrugged, a gesture of casual dominance. It's a good start, but you know how it is, Robert. In this game, you're either growing or you're dying. I spent the last week in Dubai meeting with some equity partners. They love what we're doing in the States. The appetite for American real estate is insatiable if you know who to talk to. He launched into a story about a first-class flight to London, dropping names of hotels and brands like breadcrumbs. He talked about deal flow, cap rates, and leveraging assets. He spoke in the rapid-fire, confident cadence of a TED Talk speaker. My parents were mesmerized. My father was leaning forward, nodding along, asking questions that were clearly designed to show he understood the jargon. So you're structuring it as a REIT or a private syndication? Strictly private equity for now, Logan said smoothly. We like to keep the circle tight, quality over quantity. We handpick our investors. It's more of a family office approach. Olivia sat beside him, beaming. She didn't say much. She just watched him speak, her hand resting on his forearm, her eyes shining with pride. She looked at our parents as if to say, "See? Look what I brought home. Look how successful I am by association." I sat at the far end of the table, gripping my water glass. I felt invisible. I was watching a play where everyone knew their lines except me. But more than that, I felt a strange, prickly sensation at the back of my neck. I had spent years in rooms with men who managed hundreds of millions of dollars. I knew the rhythm of their speech. I knew the specific, understated arrogance of true wealth. Logan was loud, he was flashy, he was using buzzwords correctly, but the connective tissue of his stories felt thin. He talked about the deal, but never the specifics of the underlying asset. He talked about partners, but never named the firm. Emily, my mother's voice cut through my thoughts, sharp as a knife. I looked up. They were all looking at me. You're awfully quiet, she said, her smile tight. Logan was just asking if you've ever been to Miami. Oh, I said, unclenching my hand from the glass. No, I haven't. I spent most of my time in New York. New York is a beast, Logan said, nodding sagely. Mariner Ridge Capital has an office in Manhattan. I'm a partner there. We handle some of the institutional overflow. I froze. Mariner Ridge Capital. That was a name I knew. It was a mid-tier but respectable firm. I had interviewed with them 4 years ago. You're a partner at Mariner Ridge, I asked, my voice steady, though my pulse quickened. That's right, Logan said, taking another bite of roast beef. Based out of the Miami branch, but I'm in the city once a month for board meetings. I looked at him, really looked at him. A partner at Mariner Ridge wouldn't be bragging about a $200 million gross development value as if it were the crown jewel. For a firm that size, $200 million was a Tuesday, and he was too young. The partners at Mariner Ridge were gray-haired sharks who had survived the 2008 crash, not 35-year-olds with veneers. That's interesting, I said quietly. It is, my father interjected, sensing a lull and rushing to fill it. It's incredible, really. Olivia is so lucky to have someone with such vision. He looked at me when he said it. The comparison was silent but deafening. Olivia found a visionary. You found a couch. I took a sip of water, the cold liquid doing nothing to cool the heat rising in my face. I watched my parents fawn over him. I watched Olivia bask in the reflected glory, and I realized that I wasn't just a ghost in this room. I was a threat. Because I was the only one here who wasn't looking at Logan Pierce and seeing a god. I was looking at him and seeing a blur, a dataset that didn't quite converge. But I couldn't say a word. Not yet. The play had to continue. The clinking of silverware against fine china had settled into a steady, rhythmic cadence, a sophisticated background noise to the monologue that Logan Pierce had been delivering for the better part of an hour. He had moved seamlessly from real estate valuations to the superiority of Italian leather, and my parents were hanging on every syllable as if it were gospel. I focused on cutting my roast beef into geometrically precise cubes, a small act of control in a situation that felt increasingly like a landslide. I knew it was coming, it always did. The conversation in this house followed a Newtonian law of motion eventually. The gravity of their disappointment would pull the topic toward me. It happened during a brief lull, just as my mother was refilling Logan's wine glass. She set the bottle down, dabbed her lips with a linen napkin, and turned her gaze to me. It wasn't a malicious look, exactly. It was worse. It was the look of someone inspecting a stain on a favorite rug, a mixture of confusion and a desire to scrub it away. "So, Emily," she began, her voice dropping to that hushed, sympathetic tone she used for funerals and my career choices. "You, are you still just resting?" The word resting hung in the air, heavy and lethargic. It stripped away the intellectual rigor of my studies, the deliberate strategy of my break, and replaced it with an image of me lying on a sofa in pajamas, eating cereal at noon. I placed my knife and fork down, aligning them perfectly on the rim of the plate. "I'm taking courses, Mom. Machine learning and predictive modeling. It's actually quite intense." "Right, right." She waved a hand dismissively. "Courses. But no actual job yet. No interviews." Before I could answer, before I could explain that I had turned down 3 recruitment calls last week because they weren't the right fit, Logan leaned forward. He rested his elbows on the table, invading the center space, his eyes locking onto mine with a glint of amusement. "So," he drawled, a smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "Let me get this straight. You're Olivia's older sister, right? And you're on what did you call it? A sabbatical." "That's right," I said, my voice tight. He chuckled, a low rumble that sounded like a car engine idling. "A sabbatical. That's a nice word for it. In my industry, we usually just call that unemployed. But hey, put a fancy label on it. Maybe it sells better, right? High-end unemployment." The table erupted. My mother let out a tittering, nervous laugh. Olivia giggled, though she had the grace to look down at her plate while she did it. But it was my father's reaction that cut the deepest. He didn't defend me. He didn't correct the stranger who was mocking his daughter at his own table. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, took a sip of his scotch, and shrugged. "She's smart as a whip, Logan," my father said, his tone casual, indifferent. "Always has been. Top of her class. She just hasn't quite decided to grow up yet. Likes to drift." Drift. The word hit me like a physical blow. I felt the heat rising up the back of my neck, spreading across my scalp. It wasn't shame. I was past shame. Shame implies you agree with the judgment. This was anger. It was a hot, molten fury that I had to swallow down, forcing it into a tight ball in my stomach. I had managed risk portfolios worth hundreds of millions. I had built algorithms that predicted currency fluctuations with 90% accuracy. I had worked 80-hour weeks while my father was already retired on the golf course. And here I was, being reduced to a petulant child by a man whose suit was too shiny and whose smile was too white. "I think there's a difference between drifting and steering," I said, my voice quiet but steady. "Sometimes you have to take your foot off the gas to check the map." Logan laughed again, louder this time. He gestured with his wine glass, sloshing a bit of the expensive red liquid. See? That's exactly what I'm talking about. The map. That's the problem with your generation, no offense. Live, but there's this lack of hunger. Everyone wants to find themselves. You know, when I found myself, when I closed my first seven-figure deal at 22, that's when you find yourself. In the numbers. In the win. Yeah, he looked around the table, basking in the attention. Ambition isn't something you learn in a course, Emily. You either have it, or you're watching from the sidelines. My mother nodded enthusiastically. Exactly. That's what we've always tried to tell her. You have to want it. I looked at Olivia. She was watching Logan with wide, adoring eyes, completely captivated by his speech on grit and glory. She didn't see the cruelty in his words. She only saw the confidence. She saw a man who knew who he was, and that certainty was intoxicating to her. I took a slow breath, counting to 3. Don't engage, don't make a scene, survive dinner. So, I said, shifting the focus, aiming for a neutral topic. You mentioned Mariner Ridge Capital earlier. You're a partner there. Logan nodded, puffed up by the acknowledgement. That's right. Been with them for, what, 3 years now. Great group of guys. We run a tight ship in Manhattan. I handle the alternative asset division, specifically the real estate arm. We're doing some aggressive restructuring right now. Interesting, I said. I didn't know Mariner Ridge had a dedicated real estate arm. I thought they were primarily focused on long-short equity and distressed debt. For a split second, the air in the room went still. It was a micro moment, imperceptible to anyone who wasn't looking for it. Logan's smile faltered. His eyes flickered just a tiny, rapid movement to the left. A tell. Well, he said, recovering quickly, his voice booming to cover the hesitation. That's the public face. Of course, the retail side. The real money, the proprietary desk, that's where I operate. We keep that off the books. Or, well, off the public books, I should say. He winked at my father. You know how it is, Robert. The best opportunities aren't on the website. Of course, of course, my father agreed sagely, though I knew for a fact he had no idea what a proprietary desk actually entailed in this context. Inside baseball. Exactly, Logan said. We have a credit committee that meets every Tuesday. It's brutal, Shark Tank stuff. But that's where the magic happens. I froze. My hand stopped halfway to my water glass. Credit committee. Hedge funds, especially equity-focused ones like Mariner Ridge, don't typically have credit committees in the way commercial banks do. They have investment committees, risk committees, but credit committee is banker terminology. It's the language of loans and underwriting, not the language of alpha generation and arbitrage. And then there was the timeline. He said he'd been a partner for 3 years, but 5 minutes ago, he was talking about running his own private firm in Miami. Now he was a partner at a New York hedge fund. Which was it? Was he a developer? A fund manager? An independent investor? The pieces didn't fit. They were jagged edges being jammed together by sheer force of personality. I looked at him across the table. He was laughing at something my mother said, his head thrown back, exposing the smooth line of his throat. He looked perfect. He sounded perfect. To my family, he was the embodiment of the American dream. But my analyst brain, the part of me that had been trained to spot anomalies in terabytes of data, was screaming, "Error, error, does not compute." You know, I said, keeping my voice light, casual. I have a friend who used to work at Mariner, in compliance, Mark Ellis. Do you know him? Logan didn't even blink. Ellis. The name rings a bell. Compliance guys. Though, they keep to themselves in the basement, right? We try to stay out of their way so we can actually make money. The table laughed again. My father slapped the table. Good one. Logan? Lawyers and compliance necessary evils. I forced a smile. Mark Ellis wasn't in the basement. He was the head of compliance. He sat on the executive floor. Anyone who was a partner would know him intimately, because Mark was the guy who signed off on their personal trading disclosures every single quarter. Logan Pierce was lying. I didn't know the extent of it yet. I didn't know if he was just exaggerating his role, padding his resume to impress the in-laws, or if it was something darker. But he was lying. I looked at Olivia. She was leaning her head on his shoulder, looking at the ring finger on her left hand, imagining the diamond that would soon be there. She looked so happy, so safe, and I felt a cold knot of dread tighten in my stomach. The humiliation of his unemployed joke faded instantly, replaced by a much sharper, colder fear. I wasn't just the black sheep anymore. I was the witness. I picked up my water glass and took a long sip. The water was cold, grounding me. I didn't say another word for the rest of the meal. I let them talk. I let them laugh. I let Logan spin his tales of private jets and secret deals. But I was listening. I was recording. Every discrepancy, every misused term, every timeline that didn't add up. I was collecting the data, and when I got home tonight, I was going to run the analysis. The lemon tart was served with a precision that bordered on military. My mother placed the dessert plates down Wedgwood, bone china, delicate floral patterns, and stepped back to admire the scene. The tart was perfectly yellow, the raspberries arranged in a flawless circle, the mint leaf placed at a jaunty 45-degree angle. It was a beautiful, sweet confection designed to mask the bitterness that was starting to rise in the back of my throat. I picked up my dessert fork, the silver cold against my fingers, and took a small bite. It was too sweet. Everything about this night was too sweet. Logan was still talking. He hadn't really stopped since the appetizers. The subject had shifted from his personal triumphs to the mechanics of his supposed empire. And this was where the ground beneath him started to get slippery. "You see, Robert," Logan said, leaning back in his chair and gesturing with a teaspoon as if conducting a symphony. "The problem with the retail market is the friction. Too many regulators, too many eyes on the paper. At Mariner Ridge, specifically in my division, we structure things differently. We bypass the traditional lending institutions. We become the bank." My father nodded, his face arranged in a mask of serious contemplation. "Smart. Cut out the middleman. Capture the spread." "Exactly," Logan beamed, pointing the spoon at him. "Capture the spread. That's the name of the game. We're doing a deal right now in Brickell. A 40-story mixed-use tower. We're coming in as the primary equity, but we're structuring the capital stack like debt. It's a hybrid instrument. We get the upside of equity, but the security of a first lien mortgage." I paused, my fork hovering halfway to my mouth. Wait. I chewed slowly, my mind racing back to the training manuals I had memorized during my first year in New York. I had spent thousands of hours staring at capital stacks, the hierarchy of who gets paid first when a company goes bust. What Logan was describing was a unicorn. You don't get the upside of equity with the security of a first lien mortgage. That's the financial equivalent of saying you're a vegan who eats steak. Equity is high risk, high reward, you get paid last, but you get the profits. Debt is low risk, fixed reward, you get paid first, but you're capped at the interest rate. You can have mezzanine debt, or preferred equity, or convertible notes, sure. But you don't just mash them together and call it a hybrid instrument that miraculously defies the laws of risk and return. "That sounds complex," I said, keeping my voice mild. "How do you handle the subordination if the developer defaults? If you're equity, you're wiped out before the lenders." Logan turned to me, his eyes narrowing slightly. It wasn't fear I saw there. Not yet. It was an annoyance. The annoyance of a magician being asked to explain how the rabbit got into the hat. "It's a proprietary structure, Emily," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. "We have an internal credit committee that underwrites the risk before we even deploy the capital. We treat it like a commercial loan until the trigger event, then it converts. It's all about the underwriting." Credit committee, underwriting, commercial loan. The terms were rattling around in my head like loose change in a dryer. I had worked at a hedge fund. We didn't have credit committees. Banks have credit committees. Banks underwrite loans. Hedge funds have investment committees, or risk officers. They analyze positions and exposure, not loans. He was mixing languages. He was speaking a pidgin dialect of finance, a little bit of Wall Street, a little bit of commercial banking, and a whole lot of nonsense. It sounded impressive to my parents, who knew enough to recognize the words but not enough to understand the grammar. To them, he sounded like a titan of industry. To me, he sounded like someone who had watched The Big Short and The Wolf of Wall Street on a loop and memorized the script without understanding the plot. "And Mariner Ridge signs off on this?" I asked, pushing a raspberry around my plate. I always thought their mandate was strictly public markets. Long-short equity, maybe some distressed debt. I didn't know they were doing ground-up development deals in Miami. "Adapt or die, Emily," Logan said with a shrug. "The firm is evolving. I'm leading that charge. The partners in New York trust me to expand the footprint. That's why they gave me the keys to the Southeast region." "That's a lot of trust," I said. "It is," he agreed, missing the irony completely. "But when you deliver 20% returns year over year, you get a long leash." 20% year over year. Another red flag. In the current market, with interest rates where they were, a consistent, volatility-free 20% return was statistically impossible. Even the legendary Renaissance technologies had down months. Even the best quants in the world admitted to volatility. But Logan Pierce was claiming he printed money like a machine. "That is incredible," my mother breathed. 20%. Well, that's much better than our mutual funds. Robert. "Mutual funds are for people who want to stay middle class, Susan," Logan said softly, leaning in. It was a predatory move, framed as intimacy. "No offense, but the system is rigged to keep you slow. The real wealth, the kind that builds dynasties, is in private placements, off-market deals." I watched him work the room. He was shifting gears now. He wasn't just bragging anymore. He was selling. He was planting a seed. He wasn't asking for money, not yet. That would be too crude. He was just showing them the glistening water, letting them realize how thirsty they were. My father took the bait. "I've always said the market is too volatile," he muttered, swirling his scotch. "We took a hit last quarter, tech stocks." "Tech is a bubble," Logan declared. "Real estate is dirt. It's tangible. You can touch it. And with my structure, the risk is practically zero." As risk is practically zero. That was the line that did it. That was the moment I stopped analyzing and started judging. There is no such thing as zero risk. Every analyst learns that on day one. If someone tells you there is zero risk, they are either an idiot or a thief. And Logan Pierce didn't strike me as an idiot. I looked at Olivia. She was eating her tart, oblivious to the fact that her fiancé was pitching a financial fairy tale to our parents. She looked so proud. She caught my eye and smiled. A genuine, sisterly smile that broke my heart. "Isn't he amazing?" she mouthed silently across the table. I forced the muscles of my face to curve upward. I couldn't tell her, not here, not now, not. If I spoke up, if I said, "Logan, that's not how mezzanine financing works," or "Mariner Ridge doesn't have a Southeast development arm," I would look like the jealous, bitter, unemployed sister trying to tear down the successful golden boy. My parents would see it as an attack. Olivia would see it as betrayal. So I did what I had been trained to do. I went silent. I went dark. I stopped asking questions. Instead, I started memorizing. I memorized the name of the project in Brickell. He mentioned the Azure Heights. I memorized the name of the LLC he said he used for his personal holdings, Pierce Holdings. I memorized the specific phrase he used for his proprietary structure, convertible yield notes. I memorized the name of the head of the credit committee he casually dropped later, Jonathan Galt. I treated the rest of the dinner like a deposition. I nodded, I smiled, I said wow at the appropriate intervals. I let him weave his tapestry of lies, and I looked for every loose thread. You know, Logan said as we were finishing coffee, I usually don't open these funds to anyone outside the firm, strict compliance rules. But for family, well, there are always workarounds. I'd hate to see you guys losing money to inflation when you could be riding the wave with us. That's very generous of you. Logan, my mother said, touching his hand. Very generous. We'll talk, my father said, a gleam in his eye. We'll definitely talk. My stomach churned. The trap was set. It was subtle. It was slow. But it was closing. When the evening finally wound down, the goodbyes were a study in contrast. My parents hugged Logan like he was a returning war hero. My father slapped his back. My mother kissed his cheek. Olivia clung to his arm, looking like she had won the lottery. Good night, Emily, my mother said to me, her voice cooling instantly as she turned. Drive safe, and think about what we talked about, getting back out there. I will, Mom, I said. Nice meeting you, Emily, Logan said. He didn't offer his hand this time. He just gave me a nod, the victor acknowledging the vanquished. Good luck with the sabbatical. Hope you find whatever it is you're looking for. I think I'm getting close, I said. The double meaning flew right over his head. I walked to my car, the night air heavy and humid. The crickets were screaming in the boxwood hedges. I got in, locked the door, and sat in the darkness for a long minute. My hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from adrenaline. I looked back at the house. The golden light was still spilling onto the lawn. Inside, my family was probably toasting their good fortune. They were celebrating the arrival of the man who was going to take them to the next level. I started the engine. I didn't turn on the radio. I needed silence. I backed out of the driveway, leaving the pristine world of Stone Creek behind. As I hit the highway, speeding back toward the chaotic reality of downtown Austin, my mind wasn't on the road. It was already logging into the SEC database. It was already formulating search queries. Logan Pierce had made one fatal mistake tonight. He thought that because I was unemployed, I was powerless. He thought that because I was quiet, I was stupid. He had forgotten one thing about data analysts. We don't need to be the loudest voice in the room. We just need the data. And once we have the data, the story tells itself. I wasn't going home to sleep. I was going to war. The drive back to downtown Austin was a blur of highway lights and unresolved tension. By the time I unlocked the door to my apartment, the adrenaline that had sustained me through the dinner was beginning to curdle into a heavy, restless exhaustion. My apartment was everything my parents' house was not small, cluttered with books, and unapologetically lived in. It smelled of old paper and the vanilla candle I'd burned the night before. Usually, this space was my sanctuary, a decompression chamber where I could shed the expectations of the world. But tonight, the silence felt different. It felt charged. It was the silence of a room waiting for a verdict. I tossed my purse onto the sofa and kicked off my heels, feeling the cool hardwood against my feet. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of tap water, and stood there, staring at the humming refrigerator. Partner at Mariner Ridge Capital, 200 million in assets, credit committee. The phrases looped in my mind like a corrupted audio file. In the bright, warm light of my parents' dining room, surrounded by the smell of roast beef and the sound of laughter, Logan's words had possessed a certain weight. Charisma has a way of bending reality. It fills the gaps in logic with charm. But here, in the cold solitude of my kitchen, the charm evaporated, leaving only the raw data points. And the data points were screaming. I told myself to go to bed. I told myself I was being paranoid. That my skepticism was just a defense mechanism, a way to tear down the man who made me feel small. Maybe he was legitimate. Maybe he was just a braggart who exaggerated his title but still did the work. But I knew better. I was a data analyst. I didn't operate on maybe. I operated on verification. I walked into the living room and sat down at my small desk in the corner. I opened my laptop. The screen flared to life, casting a stark blue glow across my hands. I wasn't doing this to prove anything to my parents. They wouldn't believe me anyway. I was doing this to quiet the noise in my own head. I opened a browser window and typed Mariner Ridge Capital. The firm's website loaded instantly sleek, professional, understated, navy blue and white, a skyline of Manhattan. I navigated to the team page. My eyes scanned the rows of headshots. I was looking for the face I had just spent 3 hours staring at. I was looking for the square jaw, the veneers, the confident smirk. I scrolled. Managing partners. No. Logan Pierce. Portfolio managers. No. Logan Pierce. Senior analysts. No. Logan Pierce. I frowned. Okay. Maybe he wasn't client-facing. Maybe he was in a specialized division that didn't make the main page. I clicked on the Investment Committee tab. Nothing. I went to the News and Press section and used the site's search bar. I typed Logan Pierce. 0 results found. My heart gave a strange, hollow thump against my ribs. I opened a new tab. LinkedIn. I searched Logan Pierce Mariner Ridge Capital. Nothing. I widened the search. Logan Pierce Miami Real Estate. A few profiles popped up. A Logan Pierce, who was a bartender in South Beach. A Logan Pierce who sold insurance in Fort Lauderdale. And finally, a profile without a photo, listed as CEO at Pierce Holdings. 14 connections. No work history prior to 2020. No education listed. I stared at the screen. A man who manages $200 million does not have a LinkedIn profile with 14 connections. In the finance world, your network is your net worth. You exist in the ecosystem. You are on panels. You are quoted in industry journals. You are known. I cracked my knuckles, a nervous habit from my days on the trading floor, and opened the SEC's Edgar database. If he were a partner at a registered investment advisor like Mariner Ridge, or if he were running a private fund, soliciting money from accredited investors, his name had to appear on a Form ADV or a Form D. I ran the query. Mariner Ridge Capital. The filings were there. I pulled up the most recent brochure, the document that lists every key person who exercises control over the fund's assets. I downloaded the PDF and hit Ctrl+F. Pierce. 0 of 0. I sat back in my chair, the plastic creaking under my weight. The air in the room felt suddenly thin. He wasn't a partner. He wasn't even an employee. If he worked there, he was invisible to the federal government. Okay, I whispered to the empty room. Who are you, then? I went back to the Pierce Holdings name I'd seen on the Barebones LinkedIn profile. He had mentioned it at dinner, the vehicle for his personal wealth. I searched the Delaware Division of Corporations, Pierce Holdings, LLC. Found it. Entity number 7829341. Formation date 8 months ago. 8 months. Not the years of success he had implied. But the formation date wasn't the smoking gun. Companies get formed all the time. The smoking gun was the address. I copied the registered agent address and pasted it into Google Maps. Satellite view showed a nondescript, single-story brick building in Wilmington, Delaware. I switched to Street View. It wasn't an office tower. It wasn't a boutique investment firm. It was a registered agent service center, a mail drop used by hundreds of thousands of companies to incorporate anonymously. I dug deeper. I searched for a website for Pierce Holdings. Page not found. I searched for the Azure Heights, the massive project in Brickell he claimed to be developing. A website existed for a project with that name. It was flashy, filled with renderings of glass towers and infinity pools. I scrolled down to the bottom of the page, to the fine print. Developer, the related group. Exclusive sales, Fortune International Realty. There was no mention of Pierce Holdings, no mention of Mariner Ridge, no mention of a hybrid equity structure. The silence in my apartment deepened, becoming heavy and oppressive. My tea had gone cold. I sat there, piecing together the negative space. The internet is a loud place. It is very hard for a successful, wealthy man to move through the world without leaving footprints, property deeds, charitable donations, gala photos, alumni newsletters, speeding tickets. Logan Pierce had none of it. He was a ghost, the man who had sat at my parents' table, drinking their wine and holding my sister's hand, was a fabrication. He was a collection of buzzwords wrapped in a nice suit. He was a shell company in human form. My pulse slowed, shifting from the erratic beat of anxiety to the cold, steady thrum of realization. This wasn't just an exaggeration. This wasn't just a guy padding his resume to impress his girlfriend's dad. This was systematic. You don't accidentally claim to be a partner at a specific hedge fund. You don't accidentally invent a credit committee. A chill ran up my arms, raising goosebumps on my skin. I thought about the way my father had looked at him with total, uncritical trust. I thought about the transfer of assets my mother had mentioned, the wedding gift of the Colorado house. I thought about Olivia's stock options. They were walking toward a cliff, blindfolded, and Logan was gently guiding them by the elbow. I closed my eyes and rubbed my temples. The blue light of the screen was burning my retinas. I needed more than just the absence of evidence. Proving a negative is hard. If I went to my parents now and said, "He's not on the website," they would say. "He told us he's low profile." If I said, "His company is a shell," they would say, "That's just smart asset protection." They wanted to believe him. That was his greatest shield. He had given them the story they wanted to hear, that their daughter had chosen a winner, that their family was ascending. To break that spell, I couldn't just come with questions. I needed facts. I needed a witness. I needed someone who knew the world Logan claimed to rule. I looked at the clock. It was 1:00 a.m. in Austin. That meant it was 2:00 a.m. in New York. Too late to call anyone. But I knew who I had to call. Mark Ellis. Mark was the head of compliance at a major bank now, but he had spent years in the hedge fund trenches. We had worked together at my old firm. Mark was a cynic, a stickler for rules, and a man who remembered every face he'd ever seen. If Logan Pierce had ever stepped foot on a trading floor in Manhattan, Mark would know him. I reached for a sticky note and a pen. I wrote down one name, Mark Ellis. Then I wrote down the questions I needed to ask. 1. Does Mariner Ridge have a Miami office? 2. Who is Logan Pierce? 3. Is convertible yield note a real thing or gibberish? I stuck the note to my laptop screen. I didn't sleep well that night. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the sirens wailing in the distance. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Olivia's face at the dinner table, that look of pure, unguarded happiness. It was the look of someone who believes they are safe. I turned over, burying my face in the pillow. I felt a sick feeling in my gut, a mixture of dread and resolve. I was the black sheep. I was the failure. I was the one who couldn't hack it in New York. But right now, I was the only thing standing between my family and ruin. The morning sun in Austin is usually a source of comfort, a bright, relentless promise that the day has begun. But that morning, as it streamed through my blinds and hit the stack of printed SEC filings on my desk, it felt harsh, illuminating. It was the kind of light that exposes dust in the corners and cracks in the plaster. I hadn't slept more than 2 hours. My mind had been a hamster wheel of worst-case scenarios, spinning through bankruptcy filings, foreclosure notices, and the devastated look on my sister's face. At 9:00 a.m. Central Time, I poured my third cup of coffee and picked up my phone. It would be 10:00 a.m. in New York. Mark Ellis would be at his desk, likely staring at a Bloomberg terminal and complaining about the humidity. I dialed. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. "Ellis!" a voice barked. It was the sound of Midtown Manhattan, hurried, clipped, and slightly annoyed. "Mark, it's Emily," I said. "Emily Carter." There was a pause, and then the sharp edge of his voice softened. "Carter? No way. The exile returns. I thought you were meditating in a desert somewhere or herding cattle." How's the Eat, Pray, Love tour going? It's going, I said, forcing a chuckle I didn't feel. Less cattle, more coding. Listen, Mark, I know you're busy, but I need a sanity check. Can I borrow your brain for 5 minutes? For you, 10. What's up? Are you looking to get back in the game? Because we're hiring a risk analyst, and frankly, the resumes I'm seeing are tragic. Not exactly, I said. I walked to the window, staring out at the street below. A delivery truck was idling at the curb. I need to ask you about a name, someone who claims to be a player in the city. He dropped the firm's name, and it didn't sit right. Mark's tone shifted instantly. The banter vanished, replaced by the cool, cautious frequency of a compliance officer. Go ahead. Logan Pierce, I said. He claims to be a partner at Mariner Ridge Capital, says he runs a proprietary real estate desk out of Miami. Knows you, apparently. Silence. The line didn't just go quiet. It went dead still. I could hear the faint hum of the trading floor in the background, a distant ocean of noise, but Mark said nothing. Mark, I'm here, he said slowly. I'm just processing. So he is a partner? I asked, a tiny, desperate part of me hoping I was wrong, hoping that Logan was real and I was just the jealous sister. Emily, Mark said, and his voice was low, devoid of humor. Mariner Ridge doesn't have a Miami office. We don't have a real estate desk. And we definitely don't have a partner named Logan Pierce. I closed my eyes, exhaling a breath I felt like I'd been holding since dinner. Okay, that's what I thought, but he knows the lingo, he knows the structure. Yeah, he knows enough to be dangerous, Mark muttered. I've heard the name, M, but not from the employee directory. Where from? About 6 months ago, I got a call from a buddy over at Credit Risk in a private bank. He was doing a background check on a guy who was trying to open a commercial line of credit. The guy had been pitching off-market investment opportunities to some of the bank's high-net-worth clients, real estate deals, high yield, zero risk, family and friends only. You know the script. My stomach turned over. Let me guess. The guy was Logan Pierce. Bingo, Mark said. Here's the thing. When the bank asked for the prospectus, the guy stalled, said it was too sensitive for email, said the structure was proprietary. When they pushed, he disappeared, ghosted. But before he vanished, my buddy dug a little. Turns out, this Logan character had been floating around the charity gala circuit in the Hamptons last summer, rubbing elbows, buying drinks, looking the part. Did he take anyone's money? I asked, gripping the phone tight. That's the murky part, Mark said. Nothing official. No lawsuits yet. But the rumor mill, yeah. I heard a couple of doctors in Jersey put in 50 grand each for a condo flip that never happened. They didn't sue because they didn't have a paper trail, just a private loan agreement and a handshake. They were too embarrassed to go public. I sank onto the floor, my back against the wall. It was worse than I thought. He wasn't just a resume patter. He was a predator. He was a grifter who specialized in the gray areas, the spaces where ego and greed overlap. He targeted people who wanted to feel special, who wanted access to the secret deals that normal people didn't get. People like my father. He's in Austin. Mark, I whispered. He's engaged to my sister. Oh, shit, Mark breathed. Emily, tell me she hasn't signed anything. I don't know, I said. They're talking about wedding gifts, joint assets. My parents they're completely charmed. He told them he manages 200 million. Mark laughed, a harsh, barking sound. 200 million? If he had 200 million, I'd know his shoe size. Emily, listen to me. This guy is a classic affinity fraudster. He infiltrates a social circle, builds trust, and then bleeds them dry. If he's marrying into the family, he's not looking for a wife, he's looking for a host. I know, I said, my voice trembling. I saw the LLC. It's a shell in Delaware. Of course it is, Mark said. Get the documents. Whatever he's given them, if there's a wire transfer instruction, if there's a subscription agreement. Get it. I can run the QSIP numbers, check the routing, but you need to move fast. These guys, when they sense the heat, they don't fight, they run, and they take everything they can carry. I will, I said. Mark, thank you. Be careful, he warned. If he's desperate, he's dangerous. Narcissists don't like being unmasked. I hung up the phone and sat there in the silence of my apartment. The morning light didn't look harsh anymore. It looked cold. The picture was complete now. The pieces fit. The sabbatical joke, the bragging, the vague terminology, it was all smoke. Logan Pierce wasn't a success story. He was a parasite. He had identified the Carter family, our pride, our obsession with image, our desperate need to be validated as the perfect ecosystem. He knew my father would never ask for an audit because that would be impolite. He knew my mother would never question his credentials because he looked so good in a suit. He knew Olivia would never doubt him because she was in love with the reflection of herself she saw in his eyes. They were wide open, and I was the only one who saw the knife. I stood up, my legs feeling heavy but steady. The fear was still there, but it was hardening into something else, something useful. I wasn't the sad, burnt-out daughter anymore. I was the analyst who had just found the anomaly that could crash the whole system. I grabbed my car keys. I didn't know exactly what I was going to do, but I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get closer to the source. I had to see the assets Olivia was about to sign away. The game had changed. It wasn't about surviving a dinner party anymore. It was a rescue mission. The notification sound on my phone usually blends into the background noise of my life, a soft, digital chime that signals an email or a weather alert. But a week after the dinner, when my phone buzzed on the coffee table, the sound seemed to cut through the room like a warning siren. I picked it up. It was the family group chat, a new message from Olivia. There was no text at first, just an image. A high-resolution, perfectly lit close-up of a hand resting on a white linen tablecloth. On the fourth finger sat a diamond the size of a hailstone. It was an emerald cut, flanked by baguettes, glittering with an aggressive, blinding brilliance. Then came the caption, followed by a dozen heart emojis. I said, yes. We're doing it. Napa Valley. Next month. Next month. I stared at the screen, the blue light reflecting in my unblinking eyes. The speed of it was breathtaking. Most couples take a year to plan a wedding in Napa. Venues are booked seasons in advance. Caterers have waiting lists. But Logan Pierce didn't operate on standard timelines. He operated on the timeline of a man who needed to close the deal before the audit committee showed up. My phone buzzed again, a flurry of messages from my parents. Mom, oh my God. It's stunning. I'm crying. Dad, welcome to the family. Son, so proud. Mom, Napa is perfect. We need to start planning immediately. I put the phone down, feeling a cold numbness spread through my fingers. A month, that was the deadline. He was accelerating the timeline. Why? Because the cracks were starting to show. Or because he had found a way to extract the capital he needed. My phone rang in my hand. It was my mother. I took a deep breath, trying to slow my heart rate, and answered. Did you see it? She shrieked, her voice vibrating with an ecstasy I hadn't heard since Olivia's college graduation. Did you see the ring? Emily, it's a Harry Winston. Logan flew her to San Francisco just to pick it out. It's 4 carats. I saw it, Mom, I said, keeping my voice steady. It's very big. It's magnificent, she corrected, missing my tone entirely. Listen, you need to clear your schedule. The wedding is in 4 weeks at the Vintners Reserve in Napa. Logan pulled some strings, got a cancellation slot. It's destiny. Emily, pure destiny. 4 weeks is really fast. Mom, I said, testing the waters. Is there a rush? Usually, people take time to... Oh, stop being so practical, she snapped, though her good mood was too bulletproof to be fully dented. When you know, you know. Besides, Logan wants to get the finances settled before the end of the fiscal quarter. He's so responsible. My ears pricked up. Finances, fiscal quarter. What do you mean, finances? I asked, trying to sound casually curious. Well, my mother said, dropping her voice to a confidential, prideful whisper. He sat down with Olivia and looked at her portfolio. You know she has all that stock from the IPO, the tech company. I knew. Olivia had been employee number 20 at a fintech startup that went public 2 years ago. She had worked 80-hour weeks, sleeping under her desk, eating vending machine dinners, earning those shares with her sweat and sanity. That stock was her nest egg. It was her freedom. I know, I said. What about it? Logan told her it's too risky to keep it all in one basket. Mom explained. Tech is volatile. He showed her some charts, honestly. It went over my head, but he convinced her to diversify. She's selling the block, cashing out. I felt the blood drain from my face. She's selling everything. Most of it, Mom said cheerfully. About $800,000, I think. She's going to reinvest it into Logan's fund. He's creating a special spousal trust for her. High yield, backed by the Brickle project. He says he can double it in 3 years. Isn't that incredible? A husband who actually manages his wife's future? I couldn't breathe. The room was spinning. $800,000. That wasn't just money. That was Olivia's life. That was the down payment on a house, the safety net for her future children, the reward for 5 years of grinding labor. And she was about to liquidate it, turn it into untraceable cash, and hand it over to a man with a virtual office in Delaware. Mom, I said, my voice rising. She can't do that. That's her entire net worth. You don't put 100% of your liquidity into a single private asset. That's insane. It's not insane. It's smart, Mom countered, her voice sharpening. Logan is a professional. Emily. He manages hundreds of millions. I think he knows better than you do. You're just... Look, I don't want to fight. You should be happy for her. She's building an empire. Is she signing anything? I asked desperately. A prenup. A partnership agreement. Of course, Mom said dismissively. Logan's lawyers are drafting everything. He's being very protective of her. In fact, your father and I are so impressed, we've made a decision too. I closed my eyes. Please, no. What decision? The cabin in Colorado, she said. We're not using it much anymore. We're going to deed it to them as a wedding gift. Logan thinks he can use it as collateral to secure even better financing rates for their joint ventures. He calls it leveraging dormant assets. Your father thinks it's brilliant. The cabin. The timber frame house in Aspen where we had spent every Christmas since I was 5. The place where Olivia and I learned to ski. The one asset my parents owned free and clear, worth at least $2 million. They were handing him the keys. They were handing him the deed. Mom, wait, I said, gripping the phone so hard my knuckles turned white. You can't just sign the deed over. You need to wait. Just wait until after the wedding, or let a lawyer look at the transfer. We have a lawyer. Emily, Dad's handling it. Why are you being like this? Her voice was icy now. Why can't you just be supportive? Is it really that hard for you to see your sister happy? It's not that. I pleaded. I want to make sure she's safe. She is safe, Mom said with finality. She's marrying a partner at Mariner Ridge. She's never been safer. We'll send you the invitation details. Please. Emily, just show up and smile. Don't ruin this. The line went dead. I dropped the phone onto the couch and stood up, pacing the small length of my living room. My hands were shaking. This wasn't a marriage. It was a harvest. Logan Pierce was doing exactly what Mark had warned me about. He was moving with the efficiency of a butcher. He had identified the assets, the $800,000 in liquid stock, the $2,000 mountain home. He had created a narrative of diversification and leveraging to make the theft sound like sophisticated financial planning. He needed Olivia to sell the stock because you can't steal stock easily. It's traced, it's regulated. But cash is fluid. Once that $800,000 hit his Pierce Holdings account, it would be gone, wired to the Cayman Islands, or crypto, or used to pay off the previous investors he was likely stalling. And the house, he would mortgage it to the hilt the day the deed was recorded, take the cash, and leave the bank to foreclose on my parents' memories. I walked to the window and pressed my forehead against the cool glass. I looked down at the street, at the people walking by, living their normal lives. They had no idea that a crime was happening in real time, right here in the suburbs of Austin. I thought about Olivia. I thought about the time she was 12 and saved her allowance for 6 months to buy me a vintage calculator for my birthday because she knew I loved math. She was generous. She was trusting. She believed that people were fundamentally good because she was fundamentally good. Logan was weaponizing that goodness. I looked at the calendar on my wall. 4 weeks. But the stock sale, that would happen sooner. Markets open on Monday. If Logan advises it, she might put the sell order in tomorrow. The settlement takes 2 days. The wire transfer takes 1. I didn't have a month. I might not even have a week. I sat back down at my computer. The file I had started the Logan dossier was open. It contained the negative search results, the shell company registration, and the notes from my call with Mark. It was damning, but to my parents, it was just circumstantial. It was jealousy. I needed something undeniable. I needed to show them the future. I pulled up the website for the county recorder's office in Colorado. I needed to see if there were already liens on the property or if Dad had already started the paperwork. Then I pulled up the stock charts for Olivia's company. I was going to build a case, not a whispered warning, but a forensic dismantling of his plot. But as I typed, a heavier realization settled in my chest. Even if I had the proof, how do I deliver it? If I walked into that house now, screaming fraud, they would kick me out. They were intoxicated by the dream he was selling. You can't wake a sleepwalker by shouting. You have to guide them, or they'll fall. I picked up the wedding invitation that had just arrived in my email inbox. It was cream-colored, with gold-embossed lettering. Olivia Carter and Logan Pierce request the honor of your presence. I stared at the name Logan Pierce. It looked so legitimate on paper, so permanent. I'm coming, I whispered, my voice raspy in the empty room. But I'm not coming to celebrate. I wasn't just going to Napa to attend a wedding. I was going to Napa to stop a robbery. And for the first time in my life, I didn't care if I was the polite, quiet daughter. I didn't care if I was the problem. I would burn the whole ceremony to the ground if that's what it took to save her. I reached for my phone and opened a new text message to Mark. He's making his move. $800K liquidity event and a property transfer. I need everything you can find on his associates. Does the name Jonathan Galt mean anything to you? I hit send. The trap was opening. But Logan had made one miscalculation. He thought he was dealing with a family of sheep. He didn't know there was a wolf watching from the edge of the flock. And this wolf was done hiding. The wait for information is a physical thing. It sits in your chest like a stone, heavy and cold, making it hard to breathe, hard to eat, hard to focus on anything other than the silence of your phone. For 2 days, I existed in a state of suspended animation. I went through the motions of my daily life: coffee, code, run, repeat, but my mind was entirely elsewhere. It was in New York, navigating the invisible networks of finance, waiting for Mark to pull a thread. I knew Mark couldn't access Logan's private bank accounts. That would be illegal. And Mark was a compliance officer. He lived and died by the rule of law. But in the financial world, there is a gray zone. There are people who specialize in the data that doesn't make it to the glossy brochures: forensic accountants, private investigators, fraud analysts. People who know where the bodies are buried because they're the ones usually hired to dig them up. On Wednesday afternoon, my phone finally pinged. Mark, Check your secure email. I put you in touch with Jenna. She's an independent forensic analyst. She tracks affinity fraud rings for a living. She found him. I felt a jolt of electricity run down my spine. I opened my laptop, my fingers fumbling slightly as I logged into my encrypted email server. There was one new message. Sender JV Analytics Subject Inquiry, Pierce Holdings, SL. Pierce Attachment, LP Preliminary Dossier.pdf. I didn't hesitate. I clicked open. The file was 14 pages long. It wasn't a sleek corporate report. It was a raw, ugly collection of public records, court filings, and scraped data. It was the autopsy of a scam, Ms. Carter, the email body read. Mark asked me to look into the entity Pierce Holdings LLC. The structure is classic. It's a pass-through entity with no assets, designed to shield the principal from liability while collecting funds. But the real story is in the UCC filings and the civil dockets. This man isn't an investor, he's a debtor. I scrolled down to the first chart. In the United States, when you lend money to a business and want to secure that loan against its assets, you file a UCC-1 financing statement. It's a public record. It tells the world, this guy owes me money. The list for Logan Pierce was a bleeding wound. Claimant Sarah Jenkins, Sarasota. FL date, November 12, 2022. Amount $50,000. Collateral, investment interest in Miami project. Claimant Arthur and Betty Miller, Boca Raton. FL date, January 15, 2023. Amount $125,000. Collateral, private promissory note. Claimant David Chen Austin. TX date, April 02, 2023. Amount $75,000. Collateral general assets of Pierce Holdings. The list went on. There were 7 of them in the last 18 months. The amounts varied $50,000, $100,000, $300,000. These weren't institutional loans from banks like JP Morgan or Wells Fargo. Banks don't lend against vague investment interests. These were individuals, retirees, small business owners, people who had likely been charmed at a cocktail party, just like my parents. I looked at the dates. The most recent filing was just 3 weeks ago. Jenna had included notes in the margins. Pattern suggests a rolling liquidity crisis. He raises capital from person B to pay the interest payments for person A. He's not investing this money. He's juggling it. I felt sick. It was a Ponzi scheme. A small, messy, desperate Ponzi scheme disguised as a boutique private equity fund. But the UCC filings were just the skeleton. The flesh and blood of the story lay in the second half of the document. Jenna had scraped a niche financial forum, the Accredited Investor Watchdog, a place where people go to complain when they've been burned but are too embarrassed to call the police. I clicked the link Jenna provided, and my screen filled with a thread titled Anyone Dealing with Logan P. In Miami. Real Estate Off-Market Deals. I started reading. The voices of the ghosts filled my quiet apartment. User Suncoast Retiree posted 4 months ago. Met this guy at a charity golf tournament. Charismatic. Drives a Bentley. Said he was a partner at a big NY fund, but doing some private deals on the side. I put in $50K for a short-term bridge loan on a condo renovation. He paid the first 2 months of interest like clockwork. Then, silence. Phone goes to voicemail. His office is a UPS store. Does anyone have a real address for him? User Investor Dave88 posted 2 months ago. Same story here. He showed me blueprints for a tower in Brickell, called it the Azure Heights. I checked with the city later. He has nothing to do with that project. I'm out $100K. My lawyer says the LLC is empty. If I sue, I'll just spend more money chasing a ghost. He keeps telling me it's a banking delay and the credit committee is reviewing my payout. It's all BS. User Miami Mom posted 1 week ago. He's gone. I heard he moved to Texas. He owes my father $200K. That was his retirement money. If anyone finds him, please DM me. We are desperate. I stopped reading. I couldn't take any more. My hand was gripping the mouse so hard my fingers cramped. Texas. He had moved to Texas. He wasn't expanding his empire, he was fleeing the blast zone. He had burned through the goodwill in Florida, tapped out the easy marks, and when the heat got too high, when the Miami mom and Suncoast retiree started asking for their principal back, he packed his bags and came to Austin. And he found Olivia. I looked at the numbers again, the dates, the desperation. He wasn't rushing the wedding because he was in love. He wasn't rushing the stock sale because the market was volatile. He was rushing because the clock was ticking on his previous victims. He needed fresh blood. He needed Olivia's $800,000 to pay off the people in Miami who were threatening to sue him. My sister wasn't just a bride, she was a liquidity event. A wave of nausea rolled over me, followed immediately by a cold, sharp clarity. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't my family being optimistic. This was a crime in progress. I looked at the memos listed on the wire transfer receipts some of the forum users had uploaded. Memo private agreement, memo consulting fee, memo strategic investment. Vague, meaningless. Designed to look like a business but is legally flimsy. If Olivia wired that money, it would be gone forever. I stood up and walked to the kitchen, splashing cold water on my face. I looked at myself in the mirror. My eyes were red-rimmed, my skin pale. I looked like a wreck. But inside, the hesitation was gone. For years, I had let my family's narrative define me. I was the failure. I was the one who couldn't handle the pressure. I was disappointed. I had let them make me feel small because I thought maybe they were right. Maybe I was broken. But looking at that file, I realized something. My failure, my cynicism, my obsession with data, my refusal to accept things at face value wasn't a flaw. It was a weapon. My parents, with their perfect lawns and their trust in appearances, were defenseless against a man like Logan. They lived in a world where a suit meant success and a smile meant honesty. They were sheep waiting for the slaughter. I was the only one who knew how to hunt the wolf. I walked back to my desk and hit print. The printer whirred to life, spitting out the pages one by one, the UCC filings, the forum posts, the hollow shell of the Delaware LLC. I organized them into a pile. This was no longer just information. It was ammunition. I thought about calling my parents right then. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over my mother's contact, but I stopped. If I sent this to them now, over email or text, Logan would spin it. He was there, in their house, in their heads. He would say these were competitors trying to smear him. He would say the forum posts were fake news. And he would say I was hysterical, jealous, trying to sabotage Olivia's happiness because I was miserable. He would isolate them even further. No, I couldn't do this remotely. I couldn't let him control the narrative. I had to be there. I had to stand in front of them, look him in the eye, and put the paper on the table. I had to wait for the moment when he was most confident, when his guard was down. And then I had to break him. The wedding. It was risky. It was dramatic. It was everything I hated. But it was the only way to ensure that when the truth came out, there was nowhere for him to hide. I grabbed a red folder from my drawer and placed the stack of papers inside. I labeled it simply due diligence. Then I opened my laptop and booked a flight to San Francisco with a rental car to Napa Valley. Hold on, Olivia, I whispered to the empty room. Just hold on. I'm coming. I wasn't the black sheep anymore. I was the line in the sand. The physical invitation arrived via FedEx 2 days later. It was a heavy, textured envelope that felt expensive to the touch. Inside, the card was letterpressed on thick cotton paper, the ink a deep, elegant navy. The pleasure of your company is requested at the wedding of Olivia Marie Carter and Logan James Pierce. Vintners Reserve, Napa Valley. Saturday, the 14th of June. Tucked inside was a smaller, handwritten note on personal stationery. Olivia's handwriting hadn't changed since high school. Looped, bubbly, optimistic. M. I know things have been weird, but I really hope you come. I want everything to be perfect. It wouldn't be right without you. Please, love, live. I ran my thumb over the ink. I want everything to be perfect. That was the tragedy of it. Olivia was chasing a fairy tale. She wanted the vineyard sunset, the handsome husband, the applause of our parents. She wanted the picture to be flawless, and I was holding the match that would burn the photograph to ash. I picked up my phone and typed a reply. I didn't use emojis. I didn't offer platitudes. I'll be there. Live. I promise. I wasn't going to witness a union. I was going to perform an intervention. For the next 3 nights, my apartment transformed into a war room. I wasn't sleeping much. The adrenaline was a constant, low-level hum in my blood. I had the facts, but facts alone aren't enough when you're fighting against emotion. You have to weave the facts into a story that is undeniable. A story that breaks through the cognitive dissonance of people who desperately want to believe the lie. I cleared my dining table and laid everything out. It was a mosaic of deceit. Exhibit A, the identity. I printed the email from Mark, redacted to protect his privacy, but clear in its content, confirmed with HR and legal at Mariner Ridge Capital, no record of employment or partnership for Logan Pierce. Next to it, I placed the printout of the Mariner Ridge executive team page and the empty LinkedIn search results. Theme: the man you are marrying does not exist. Exhibit B, the business. I laid out the Delaware LLC filings for Pierce Holdings, the virtual office address in Wilmington. Then, the screenshots from the accredited investor watchdog forum, the cries for help from Suncoast retiree and Miami mom. I highlighted the dates. The most recent complaint was only 2 weeks old. Theme: he is not rich, he is running. Exhibit C, the trap. This was the hardest part to look at. Earlier that week, Olivia had forwarded me a draft of the prenuptial agreement. Logan's lawyers sent this over, she had said in the email. It's all standard legalese, but Dad said it looks fine. Can you just scan it? You're good at reading the fine print. I had read it, and I had nearly thrown up. It was a masterclass in predatory legal writing. On the surface, it looked like it protected both parties. But buried in Article 4, Section C, a section titled Management of Marital Assets, was a clause that gave the primary investment manager, defined later as Logan, unilateral discretion to reallocate liquid assets for the purpose of portfolio diversification. In plain English, once they were married, he could legally take money from her personal accounts and move it into his investments without her signature. And then there was Article 6, regarding the Colorado property. As it listed the cabin not as separate property, but as a contributed asset to the marital estate, subject to immediate leveraging for joint business ventures. He wasn't just planning to steal from her, he was getting her to sign a permission slip. I printed the pages, circling the clauses in red ink. I annotated them with sticky notes explaining exactly what they meant. This gives him your bank account. This lets him mortgage Mom and Dad's cabin. I organized the papers into a sleek, black leather binder. I didn't want loose sheets. I wanted it to look official. I wanted it to have the weight of a legal indictment. When I was finished, I closed the binder. It sat on my table, innocuous and terrifying. Inside that leather cover was the end of my sister's happiness. It was the end of my parents' pride. It was the end of the peace we had maintained for so long. I knew what would happen. They would hate me. Not forever, maybe, but in the moment. They would despise me. I would be the villain who ruined the wedding. I would be the bitter, jealous sister who couldn't stand to see Olivia shine. I walked to the window and looked out at the Austin skyline. I thought about the easy way out. I could just stay home. I could feign illness. I could let them get married. Let Olivia transfer the money. Let the house get mortgaged. When the crash came, and it would come, I could be there to pick up the pieces. I could say, "I told you so," or just silently help them rebuild. But then I pictured Olivia in 5 years, broke, divorced, her credit is ruined, her trust in the world was shattered. I pictured my parents losing the cabin, their retirement drained, looking old and defeated. Imperfect action is better than perfect inaction. I turned back to the room. I packed my suitcase. I chose a dress navy blue, structured, serious. Not a bridesmaid's dress, a witness's dress. I placed the black binder in my carry-on bag, right next to my laptop. I zipped it shut. The sound was loud in the quiet apartment. "I'm sorry, Liv," I whispered. I wasn't going to Napa to toast the bride and groom. I was going to Napa to save her life. And if I had to break her heart to save her future, then that was the price I would pay. I set my alarm for 4:00 a.m. I had a plane to catch. The weather in Napa Valley that Saturday was aggressive in its perfection. The sky was a hard enamel blue, without a single cloud to soften the glare. The sun draped over the rolling hills of the vineyard like a heavy gold blanket, illuminating every grape leaf, every crystal goblet, every carefully placed white rose. It was the kind of beauty that felt curated, filtered, and utterly devoid of accidents. It was exactly the backdrop Logan Pierce would choose: expensive, flawless, and surface level. I stood near the back of the ceremony seating, my heels sinking slightly into the manicured grass. I was wearing the navy dress I had packed, dark, sharp, a bruise against the pastel palette of the rest of the guests. My parents were in the front row. I could see the back of my father's head, his silver hair gleaming, and my mother's shoulder shaking gently as she dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. They were watching a coronation. They thought they were witnessing the final triumph of the Carter family legacy. I was clutching my purse with both hands. Inside, the black binder sat against the lining like a brick. It was just 20 pages of paper, but it felt heavier than anything I had ever carried. It contained the ruin of this afternoon. It contained the end of the smiles, the end of the toasts, the end of the peace. The string quartet began to play Pachelbel's canon. The guests stood, a rustle of silk and linen. And then Olivia appeared. She stepped out from the archway of vines, and for a moment, the breath caught in my throat. She was breathtaking. The dress was simple and elegant, hugging her frame before flaring out in soft waves. Her hair was pulled back, exposing her face, which was glowing with a terrifyingly pure happiness. She wasn't walking, she was floating. She looked at the end of the aisle, and her eyes were filled with absolute, unshakable trust. I looked at where she was looking. Logan stood at the altar. He was wearing a tuxedo that fit him like a second skin. He stood with his feet apart, hands clasped in front of him, the pose of a man surveying his estate. When he saw Olivia, he smiled. It was the same smile I had seen at the dinner table. To everyone else, it looked like love. To me, it looked like ownership. He wasn't looking at a bride. He was looking at an asset that was finally vesting. I felt a wave of nausea so strong I had to look away. I focused on a row of vines to my left, counting the leaves. 1, 2, 3, 4. I had debated interrupting the ceremony. I had played the scenario out in my head 1,000 times on the flight over. The officiant would ask, "If anyone knows of any just cause," and I would stand up, brandishing the file like a weapon. He's a fraud. He's a thief. But life isn't a movie. If I did that, I would be dragged away by security. I would be the hysterical sister having a mental breakdown. My parents would apologize to the guests. Logan would look at me with pity, and the wedding would continue. The lie would survive because the delivery was flawed. No. I needed to be surgical. I needed to wait until the legally binding document was done. But the financial transfer hadn't happened. I needed to wait until the adrenaline of the ceremony faded and reality started to creep back in. The ceremony proceeded. I heard the words drift through the warm air. "Do you, Olivia, take this man, to have and to hold, for richer or for poorer?" I flinched at that. for poorer. She had no idea how quickly that part was coming. I do, Olivia said. Her voice was clear, bell-like. I do, Logan said. His voice was deep, resonant, and practiced. They exchanged rings. The diamond on Olivia's finger flashed in the sun, a 4-carat beacon paid for, likely, by the retirement savings of a dentist in Florida. I now pronounce you husband and wife. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered through the vineyard. My parents were on their feet, clapping furiously. Logan grabbed Olivia and kissed her, a dip, a flourish, a performance for the cameras. They turned and walked back up the aisle, beaming, showered in white petals. As they passed me, Olivia caught my eye. She smiled, a wide, dazzling grin that said, "See, we made it. It's perfect." I forced the muscles of my mouth to curve upward. I nodded. "Yes, Liv, you made it." The guests began to migrate toward the reception tent, a massive white canvas structure erected on the lawn. Filled with chandeliers and round tables, waiters circulated with champagne flutes, the air filled with the chatter of relief and celebration. "Beautiful ceremony, wasn't it?" An elderly woman in a floral hat asked me as we walked. "Unforgettable," I said. I moved through the crowd like a ghost. I didn't drink. I didn't eat the hors d'oeuvres. I kept my hand on my bag, feeling the outline of the binder. I watched Logan. He was in his element, holding court near the bar, accepting backslaps and handshakes. He looked invincible. He had done it. He had married the girl, secured the family's trust, and was hours away from securing their assets. I saw him lean in and whisper something to my father. My father laughed, patting Logan on the shoulder, looking at him with adoring eyes. They looked like partners. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, bird-like rhythm. The fear was still there, the fear of the explosion I was about to trigger. But underneath the fear was a cold resolve. I wasn't going to do this in front of 200 people. I wasn't going to humiliate Olivia on the dance floor. I needed to get them alone. I waited. I watched the sun begin to dip lower, casting long, golden shadows across the grass. The photographer was gathering the family for the formal portraits near the rose garden. This was it. The lull between the ceremony and the dinner, the moment when the guard is down. I saw my parents, Olivia, and Logan grouping together. They were laughing, posing. The photographer shouted instructions. Big smiles. "Everyone look at the bride." I took a deep breath. The air smelled of jasmine and expensive perfume. I walked over to them. I didn't step into the frame. I stepped in front of the camera. "Excuse me," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it was sharp enough to cut through the laughter. The photographer lowered his camera, annoyed. "Miss, if you could just step aside, we're losing the light." "Emily, come on," my mother beckoned, waving her hand. "Get in the picture. We need the maid of honor." I didn't move. I looked straight at Olivia, then at Logan. His smile faltered. Just a fraction. He saw something in my face, something he hadn't seen at the dinner table. He saw the predator recognizing the prey. "We need to talk," I said. "Now, before you sign the marriage license. Before you sign anything else." "Emily, don't be dramatic," my father snapped, stepping forward. "We can talk later. This is the photo session." "No." "Dad?" I said. I reached into my bag and pulled out the black binder. "We can't talk later, because later, the money will be gone." The silence that fell over the rose garden was heavy and instant. The string quartet in the distance seemed to fade away. "What is that?" Olivia asked, her voice trembling slightly. She looked at the black folder in my hand, then up at my eyes. She saw the tears I was holding back. "This," I said, looking at Logan, who had gone very, very still. "This is the due diligence you didn't do." I took a step forward. The illusion was at its peak. The sun was golden. The dress was white. The lie was perfect. It was time to shatter it. The transition from the rose garden to the reception area was a surreal blur. The photographer, sensing a family dispute that was above his pay grade, had awkwardly retreated. My parents, confused and visibly irritated, had ushered us toward a semi-private alcove near the edge of the tent, away from the main crush of guests but still close enough to hear the thump of the DJ's bass. "Emily, this is unacceptable," my father hissed, his face flushing a deep, angry red. "You are making a scene. Put that binder away." "Just listen, Dad," I said, my voice eerily calm. I wasn't shaking anymore. The moment the binder left my bag, the fear evaporated, replaced by the cold, hard certainty of the data. Logan was standing next to Olivia, his hand on the small of her back. It looked possessive now, not protective. His smile was still there, but it was frozen. A rictus of charm that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were darting around the periphery, calculating exits, calculating odds. "Hey, Em," Logan said, his voice smooth but pitched slightly higher than usual. "Look, if this is about the job jokes, I apologize. Let's not ruin Olivia's night over a little sibling rivalry." "It's not about the jokes, Logan," I said. I placed the black binder on a high cocktail table that stood between us. It landed with a dull thud. "I want you to look at this. Olivia," I said, opening the cover. "Before you sign the license, before you transfer the stock, just look." Olivia looked at me, her eyes wide and fearful. She didn't want to look. She wanted to turn away, to run back to the fairy tale where her sister wasn't crazy, and her husband was a hero. But she trusted me. Deep down, beneath the layers of denial, she knew I wouldn't do this unless I had to. She looked down. The first page was the email from Mariner Ridge Capital. The logo was crisp and official at the top. The text was highlighted in yellow, RE inquiry regarding Logan Pierce. "We have no record of an individual by that name currently or formerly employed as a partner or associate at Mariner Ridge Capital." I saw Logan's throat move as he swallowed. He saw the logo. The color drained from his face instantly, leaving his tan looking sallow and artificial. That's an administrative error," Logan said quickly, a nervous laugh escaping his lips. "I told you, Emily. I work on the proprietary side. We're off the main HR grid for security reasons. It's standard procedure for high-value assets." "Is it standard procedure to have a shell company in Delaware with no assets?" I asked, flipping the page. I revealed the second document, the Pierce Holdings LLC filing, showing the registered agent address in the strip mall in Wilmington. And right below it, the screenshots from the accredited investor watchdog forum. "Read the usernames, Olivia," I said softly. "Suncoast retiree, Miami mom. Read what they say." Olivia's eyes scanned the page. Her lips moved silently as she read the words. "Stopped paying interest. Ghosted us. Fake project in Brickell." "This is ridiculous," Logan snapped, reaching out to close the binder. "These are trolls, competitors. You know how the internet is. Live. People get jealous of success, and they write garbage." I slammed my hand down on the page, keeping it open. "And the UCC filings?" I asked, looking him dead in the eye. "Are the Uniform Commercial Code filings fake? Logan, are the liens against your name fake? Because, according to the state of Florida, you owe 3 different people over $200,000, and you're in default." My father stepped forward, peering at the document over Olivia's shoulder. He was a lawyer. He knew what a UCC filing looked like. He knew you couldn't fake a court docket number. "Logan," my father said, his voice losing its bluster, dropping to a confused, wary tone. "What is this? This says you have a judgment against you in Dade County." "It's a misunderstanding, Robert," Logan said, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "It's a legacy issue, a dispute with a contractor that got blown out of proportion. My legal team is handling it. It's..." It's complicated. You don't understand the structure. Stop saying structure, I shouted. The volume of my voice made people at the nearby tables turn their heads. I lowered it, but the intensity remained. There is no structure. There is no fund. There is no credit committee. It's a Ponzi scheme. Logan, you're taking money from new investors to pay off the old ones, and Olivia is the new investor. Olivia stepped back. She pulled her hand away from his back as if she had been burned. She looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time in months. She saw the sweat. She saw the shifting eyes. She saw the panic of a man whose script had just been shredded. "Is it true?" she whispered. "Did you lie about Mariner Ridge?" "Baby, look at me," Logan pleaded, reaching for her hands. "I exaggerated the title, maybe to simplify things for your parents. But the deals are real. The love is real. We're building a future together." "You asked me to sell my stock," Olivia said, her voice trembling. "You asked me to wire $800,000 to Pierce Holdings. To pay off these people." "No. To invest. To build our life." The tension in the alcove was suffocating. The guests nearby had stopped talking. The music from the DJ booth, an upbeat pop song, felt grotesque against the reality unfolding at our table. Suddenly, a voice cut through the murmur of the crowd. "Wait a minute." An older man in a gray suit, a guest from the groom's side, one of the few business associates Logan had invited to pad the numbers, pushed his way through the onlookers. He was staring at the open binder on the table, specifically at the photo of the Azure Heights project I had included in the file. "I know that project," the man said, his face darkening. He looked at Logan with dawning horror. "You pitched that to me last year, in Miami. You told me you had exclusive rights." Logan froze. "Mr. Henderson, please. This isn't the time. You took $150,000 from me." The man, Mr. Henderson, said, his voice rising to a bellow. "You told me it was a bridge loan for the permitting phase. You said the city was holding it up, but you never paid me back. You stopped answering my calls." The silence that followed was absolute. It rippled outward from our table, silencing the toasts, silencing the laughter. The DJ, sensing the shift in the room, faded the music out. "Mr. Henderson pointed a shaking finger at Logan. "That's him. That's the guy. I didn't recognize the name Pierce because he used a different LLC name with me, but that's the face. That's the voice." The air went out of the room. The whispers started, heavy and leaden. "Did he say he stole money? Who is this guy? Is the wedding off?" Logan looked around, his confident facade shattering completely. He looked small. He looked cheap. The tuxedo suddenly looked like a costume. My mother let out a small, strangled sob and covered her mouth. My father looked like he had been punched in the gut. He stared at Logan, the man he had bragged about, the man he had wanted to be his son, with a mixture of betrayal and humiliation. Olivia stood alone in the center of the circle. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and shock-still. She looked at the binder. She looked at Mr. Henderson, red-faced and angry. She looked at me, and then she looked at Logan. "You're not a partner," she said, her voice flat, dead. "Liv, please," Logan begged, stepping toward her. "I can explain. It's just liquidity. I have the assets. They're just illiquid right now. Once we combine our portfolios, I can fix everything. I can make it right. We're a team, remember?" "Combine our portfolios," she repeated. The realization hit her like a physical blow. "You didn't want me. You wanted a bailout." She looked down at the massive diamond ring on her finger, the ring he had flown her to San Francisco to buy. "Did you pay for this?" she asked. Logan didn't answer. He couldn't. "Or did Mr. Henderson pay for it?" she asked, her voice cracking. She struggled with the ring, twisting it violently over her knuckle. It wouldn't come off. She yanked it harder, scraping her skin, until it finally slid free. She threw it. It hit Logan in the chest and bounced onto the grass with a dull, insignificant sound. "Get out!" Olivia whispered. "Liv, get out!" she screamed. It was a primal sound, a release of all the pressure, all the perfection, all the lies she had been fed. Logan looked at the crowd. He saw the anger in my father's eyes. He saw Mr. Henderson stepping forward, looking like he wanted to throw a punch. He saw the guests pulling out their phones. He realized the game was over. The host had rejected the parasite. He straightened his jacket, trying to salvage a shred of dignity that wasn't there. He shot a look of pure venom at me, a look that said, "I will kill you for this," and then turned on his heel. He walked away, not with the confident stride of a CEO, but with the hurried, scurrying pace of a thief caught in the light. He walked past the white tables, past the untouched wedding cake, and disappeared into the parking lot. The silence lingered for a long, painful second. Then, Olivia's knees buckled. I was there before she hit the ground. I caught her, wrapping my arms around her waist, holding her up as she began to sob into my shoulder. The white dress pooled around us on the grass. "I've got you," I whispered, holding her tight, feeling her shake apart. "I've got you. It's over. You're safe." My parents stood over us, frozen, paralyzed by the public shame. But I didn't care about them. I didn't care about the guests. I just held my sister, listening to the sound of the illusion shattering, and knowing that, finally, we were standing on solid ground. The chaos that followed didn't sound like a wedding anymore. It sounded like a riot in a library, hushed, frantic, and laced with the sharp, jagged edges of panic. I was still on my knees in the grass, holding Olivia as she trembled, her sobs racking her body in violent, silent spasms. The white dress was stained with grass and dirt, a visual metaphor that felt almost too heavy-handed for the moment. Then the shadow of my parents fell over us. I looked up, expecting relief. I expected them to drop to their knees beside us, to wrap their arms around their youngest daughter, to thank God, or at least me, that we had stopped her from signing away her future to a con artist. I expected the protective instinct of parenthood to override the social instinct of the suburbs. I was wrong. My mother's face was a mask of horrified disbelief, flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. Her eyes weren't on Olivia. They were darting wildly around the tent, scanning the guests who were now whispering behind their hands, the waiters who were awkwardly pausing with trays of champagne, the photographer who was frantically packing his gear. "Emily," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "What have you done?" I blinked, confused by the accusation. "I stopped him. Mom, he was stealing from her." "You made a scene," she cried, wringing her hands. "In front of everyone, in front of the Hendersons, in front of the club members. This is a disaster. Couldn't you have waited? You couldn't have pulled us aside privately." "There was no time," I said calmly. "He was going to—" "You always do this," my father interrupted, stepping forward. His jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscles jumping in his cheek. He looked down at me with a disappointment so profound it felt cold. "You always have to be the problem, Emily. You always have to be the one who breaks things. Look at your sister. Look at her. You've ruined her day." I looked at Olivia. She was broken. Yes, but she was free. She wasn't shackled to a mountain of debt. She wasn't married to a phantom. "I didn't ruin her day, Dad," I said, standing up slowly. My knees were sore from the hard ground. "I saved her life. There's a difference." "You humiliated us," he spat. "You humiliated this family." And there it was. The truth that had been hiding in plain sight for 29 years. To Robert and Susan Carter. The sin wasn't the lie. The sin was the exposure of the lie. They would have preferred to let Olivia marry a fraud, to let the money disappear quietly, to deal with the bankruptcy in the shadows, rather than face 5 minutes of public embarrassment in the Napa sunshine. They valued the silhouette of perfection more than the substance of safety. I looked at them, Really looked at them and realized I didn't know these people. I shared their DNA. I sat at their table, but I didn't share their soul. I turned to Olivia. She had stopped crying. She was sitting on the grass, staring at the empty space where Logan had stood, her face blank, her eyes hollow. "Liv," I said softly. She looked up. Her eyes were red, swollen, and filled with a confusion that would take years to unravel. "You have the right to know," I said, my voice steady. "You have the right to know who you are giving your life to. I'm sorry it hurt, but I'm not sorry I did it." She didn't speak. She just nodded a tiny, imperceptible movement. It wasn't a thank you, not yet. She was grieving the death of a dream. And grief is a selfish, consuming thing. But it was an acknowledgement. She knew. "I'm done now," I said. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for my mother to scold me again, or for my father to demand an apology. I picked up my bag from the cocktail table. The black binder was still there, open to the page showing the empty Delaware LLC. I left it. They could read it, or they could burn it. It didn't matter anymore. The data had been delivered. I turned and walked away. I walked past the rows of white chairs. I walked past the untouched buffet. I walked past the guests who parted for me like I was contagious, their eyes wide with morbid curiosity. I didn't look down. I didn't rush. I walked with the rhythm of someone who has finished a very long, very difficult job. I reached my rental car in the gravel lot, threw my bag into the passenger seat, and climbed in. The air inside was baking hot, trapped by the glass. But I didn't care. I started the engine, cranked the AC, and drove. I didn't look back at the vineyard. I didn't look back at the white tent or the ruin I had left behind. I drove south, toward San Francisco, toward the ocean. The road wound through the golden hills, the vines stretching out in endless, symmetrical rows. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in bruises of purple and orange. For the first 10 miles, my mind was racing, replaying the confrontation, the shouting, the look on Logan's face. But as the miles added up, as the vineyard gave way to the open highway, the noise in my head began to quiet. I thought about the word unemployed. I thought about sabbatical. I thought about failure. For months, I had let those words define me. I had let my parents' judgment hang over me like a verdict. I had believed that because I wasn't climbing a corporate ladder, because I wasn't married to a millionaire, because I wasn't perfect, I was somehow less. But driving down that highway, with the cool air blasting against my face, I realized the truth. I wasn't the failure. I was the failsafe. I was the one who stopped the crash. I was the one who saw the glitch in the code when everyone else was admiring the interface. My cynicism, my questions, my refusal to settle those weren't flaws. They were the very things that had protected the people who looked down on me. I realized that I had spent nearly 30 years trying to twist myself into a shape that would fit into their picture frame. I had tried to be softer, quieter, more agreeable. I had tried to be the daughter they wanted, but the daughter they wanted would have let Olivia sign those papers. The daughter they wanted would have smiled and clapped while the wolf ate the sheep. I wasn't that daughter. And for the first time in my life, I was glad. I understood then that sometimes you have to accept being the villain in someone else's story to be the hero in your own. You have to be willing to be the difficult one, the problem, the embarrassment, if that is the price of integrity. Truth is a lonely thing. It doesn't throw parties. It doesn't get thousands of likes on Instagram. It often leaves you driving alone on a highway while everyone else is back at the tent, drinking champagne and pretending everything is fine. But the air out here, the air on the highway, it is clean, it is clear, and it belongs to you. I rolled down the window and let the wind whip my hair across my face. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the scent of eucalyptus and salt water. I didn't know what I would do next. I didn't know if I would go back to finance, or stay in data science, or do something completely different. I didn't know if my parents would ever forgive me, or if Olivia would ever understand. But I knew one thing: I would never again apologize for seeing the world as it is, rather than how others wish it to be. I reached into my purse and pulled out my phone. I saw a dozen missed calls from my mother. I saw a text from my father. I turned the phone off. I tossed it onto the seat beside me and gripped the wheel with both hands. The road ahead was long and the night was coming. But I wasn't afraid of the dark anymore. I knew how to navigate it. If you have listened to my story this far, if you have followed me from the dinner table to the vineyard, from the silence of doubt to the noise of the truth, I have one question for you. It is a question I had to ask myself on that drive, and it is a question that will determine the course of your own life when the moment comes. We all have a Logan Pierce in our lives. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a job that looks perfect but feels empty. Maybe it's a family expectation that is crushing you. Maybe it's a lie you tell yourself to keep the peace. We all have a moment where we see the cracks. We see the data that doesn't add up. We feel the knot in our stomach that says, something is wrong. In that moment, you have a choice. You can stay at the table, you can smile, you can drink the wine and pretend the structure is sound, you can be loved and accepted and safe in the illusion, or you can stand up, you can open the binder, you can speak the words that will shatter the room. You can risk the anger, the shame, and the isolation. So, ask yourself, in your life, what are you more afraid of? Are you afraid of speaking up and being the one who ruins the party? Or are you afraid of staying silent and watching the people you love and the person you are disappear into a lie? The choice is yours. But remember, the truth doesn't wait for an invitation. It just waits for you to be brave enough to deliver it.